Welcome to your daily news roundup. We're bringing you the essential updates from around the globe.
That's right, covering a whole range of stories to keep you informed efficiently.
Let's start in Eastern Europe. There's a significant agreement between the United States and Ukraine.
It's about Ukraine's critical minerals, right? Graphite, titanium, lithium.
Exactly. Really vital stuff for renewable energy, military tech, you name it.
And the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he highlighted the commitment to, well, peace and prosperity.
They've even set up a U.S.-Ukraine reconstruction investment fund.
Which seems like a clear nod to the significant support the U.S. has given since February 2022.
The aim is clearly to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, as they put it.
What's interesting, though, is the language from the Trump administration. Pretty strong condemnation of Russia's full-scale invasion.
Yes, and specifically stating that those who finance the war won't benefit from reconstruction efforts. Unusual solidarity there.
Kiev must see this as, well, absolutely vital for getting continued U.S. military aid.
Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko certainly thinks it'll attract global investment. Minerals, oil, gas.
But she was clear the resources stay Ukrainian property.
It's structured as a 50-50 partnership, means ratification in Kyiv.
And it could mean more U.S. assistance coming through, like air defense systems, potentially.
Trump apparently pushed hard for this. He linked it to future security guarantees.
Yeah, he initially wanted repayment for all the aid, didn't he?
He did. So this deal where the U.S. gets access to some resources for future security aid, that looks like a win for Zelensky.
Trump still framed it as recouping the U.S. investment, though. Mentioned Ukraine having great rare earth and other valuable things.
Called it a big asset. And this all happens while the U.S. is in this trade friction with China.
Which controls, what, 90% of the rare earth market. So this is strategically significant for the U.S.
Definitely seems like a move to challenge that dominance. Okay, let's turn to the U.S. economy itself.
Not great news there. A contraction. First time in 3 years.
Yeah, 0.3% annualized rate, raising those recession fears again.
Though Trump says the figure is misleading, blames companies stockpiling imports before tariffs hit.
He also touted, I think it was $8 trillion in inward investment promised for manufacturing.
Right, but it's a sharp downturn from the 2.4% growth they had last quarter.
And it lands right around his 100 days in office mark, with polls showing economic discontent.
He tried to pin it on Biden's economy, which is a bit of a stretch given he took office January 20th.
Asked for a little bit of time, I believe.
Well, it comes right after his import taxes really shook up global trade.
Democrats aren't letting him off the hook. Hakeem Jeffries basically said, this is your economy, a failed economy.
Some experts are even whispering about stagflation, which is, a tough mix of stagnation and inflation.
A very difficult situation. Now, shifting focus to the Middle East and the Gaza war.
We're seeing growing opposition within Israel to the ongoing conflict.
Thousands of reservists signing letters demanding a ceasefire.
Exactly,
Yeah.
from all branches. They want the focus shifted to getting that hostage deal done. There are still 59 remaining.
The original logic, defeat Hamas, return hostages, that's being questioned more now, especially after the ceasefire collapsed in March.
Right. And figures like Danny Adam, the former Mossad chief, are suggesting Netanyahu might be prioritizing his own political survival over the hostages.
Which is a heavy accusation. Many signatories are known Netanyahu critics, but they're citing national reason for speaking out now.
The first big open letter came in April from Air Force reservists. They argued the war isn't hitting its goals and puts hostages at greater risk.
And since then, almost every branch, even elite units, over 12,000 signatures apparently.
That's significant dissent. It's reportedly affecting readiness, too.
Yeah, reservist attendance down to 50–60%. That's a potential crisis for a military so reliant on them.
Haven't seen anything like it since the '82 Lebanon War, reports say.
There was that one infantry reservist, Yoav, who said he served but won't go back.
His feeling was that the government's focus is misplaced, fighting Hamas while hostages are still captive.
He said, it's not about beating Hamas, it's about losing our country. Powerful words.
And retired General Amram Levin even suggested soldiers consider disobeying orders, citing risks of war crimes and damage to the IDF's ethos.
Critics would say those lines have already been crossed, looking at the ICC and ICJ cases.
Netanyahu's response. He's dismissed the protesters as propaganda lies from fringe elements.
But the polls seem to show the public mood is shifting towards prioritizing hostage release.
It's a deeply divisive issue within Israel right now.
Okay, let's move across the globe to Australia, a trial involving poisonous mushrooms.
Yes, the trial of Aaron Patterson. accused of murdering 3 relatives and attempting to murder a 4th after lunch back in July 2023.
Her estranged husband, Simon Patterson, testified, said it was unusual for her to host gatherings.
She's pleaded not guilty. The defense is arguing she just panicked after accidentally poisoning people she loved.
The victims were her former in-laws, Dawn and Gail Patterson, and Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson. Pastor Ian Wilkinson survived.
Texts were shown in court where Erin seemed upset Simon wasn't coming to the lunch. Wanted to have conversations, she said.
And the prosecution alleges she invited them under the false pretense of having cancer.
That's the claim. The court also heard about their marriage history, separations, reconciliations.
Simon described her as intelligent, witty, funny even, and having a good bond with his father over shared interests.
She had degrees, qualified as an air traffic controller. Seems quite accomplished.
But their communication apparently broke down after some tax issue in 2022, becoming purely logistical.
The court also heard she received a fairly substantial inheritance, around $82 million, paid out over time.
No one disputes the lunch beef Wellington contained death cap mushrooms. That's agreed upon.
The defense's argument centers on panic, that she was just overwhelmed.
Simon Patterson described finding his parents very ill the next morning. Vomiting, diarrhea, they'd called an ambulance.
He then checked on the Wilkinsons when they didn't answer. Found Ian looking gray and spooked. Heather sick.
And Heather apparently made a comment about Erin serving herself on a different colored plate.
Yes. Erin served herself her food on a colored plate which was different to the rest. That detail could be significant.
Small details often are in these cases. Okay, shifting to South Africa.
President Ramaphosa has announced a judicial inquiry. This is into alleged political interference in prosecuting apartheid-era crimes.
This comes 30 years after the end of white minority rule and after lawsuits from survivors and relatives.
Right. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, back in '96, it uncovered horrific abuses, but very few cases actually went to trial.
Ramaphosa says he's determined to establish the true facts and bring the matter to finality.
The inquiry itself stems from settlement talks in a high court case. 25 families and survivors suing for damages.
Including the son of Fort Kalata, one of the Craddock Four, killed by security forces in '85.
The officers confessed, were denied TRC amnesty, but were never prosecuted. They're all deceased now.
There have always been these allegations, haven't there, of a secret deal between the ANC and the former government to prevent prosecutions.
The ANC denies it, but the presidency acknowledged these allegations of improper influence have persisted.
We're waiting to hear who will head the inquiry and the timeline.
It's a hugely significant step towards potentially uncovering some long-buried truths.
Now back to the U.S. and tech giant Apple.
Yeah, a federal judge has found Apple willfully violated an injunction from the Epic Games case.
And said a top executive outright lied under oath. Pretty strong language from the judge.
The injunction was meant to curb anti-competitive practices, open the App Store to outside payment options.
Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers is referring it to the U.S. Attorney for a criminal contempt investigation.
Apple, unsurprisingly, strongly disagrees, plans to appeal, but says it will comply for now.
The original 2021 case was all about challenging Apple's commission up to 30% and allowing third-party payments.
That ruling said Apple couldn't stop developers linking to their own payment systems.
But the judge's latest finding says Apple knew exactly what it was doing and chose the most anti-competitive option at every turn.
She even mentioned Tim Cook ignoring advice from Philip Schiller to comply, letting the CFO Luca Maestri talk him out of it. Cook chose poorly, she wrote.
And accused the VP of Finance, Alex Roman, of the outright lie under oath.
The key example cited was Apple charging a 27% commission on off-app purchases, which were previously free, and adding new hurdles.
Epic Games CEO Tim Sweeney responded with what he called a peace proposal.
Right. If Apple offers a global, friction-free, tax-free system for web payments, Fortnite comes back to the App Store and litigation ends.
Sweeney was blunt. No fees on web transactions. Game over for the Apple tax.
Quite the statement. We'll see how Apple responds to that.
Indeed. Now let's head to Kenya, where there's tragic news.
Yes, a member of parliament, Charles Ongondo Ware, has been shot dead in Nairobi.
By gunmen on a motorcycle, police suspect it was a targeted assassination.
That's the initial assessment. They say the attackers trailed his vehicle, shot him at close range. Targeted and predetermined, the police spokesperson said.
And apparently the MP had reported receiving threats a couple of months ago.
His driver and bodyguard were unharmed, rushed him to hospital, but he sadly died.
The attack happened on Angong Road, near a busy policed roundabout with cameras.
President Ruto has ordered a full investigation. Colleagues are shocked, demanding justice.
The speaker, Moses Wetangula, called him fearless and distinguished.
We're represented the Kasipul constituency for the Orange Democratic Movement, led by Raila Odinga.
Odinga condemned it strongly, called it a merciless and cold-blooded assassination.
You'll remember Odinga lost to Ruto in the 2022 election and disputed the results. Adds another layer to this.
Absolutely. Staying in Europe for a moment, related to the recent blackout in Spain and Portugal.
Ah, yes. Authorities are now investigating several deaths potentially linked to it.
3 family members died in Tabadella. Police are looking at carbon monoxide from a generator they were using.
And a woman in Madrid died in a fire possibly started by candles used during the outage.
There's also a case in Valencia, a woman in her 40s. Police initially thought her ventilator might have lost power.
But health officials are suggesting natural causes seem more likely there. Still under investigation, though.
The blackout itself caused huge disruption across Spain, Portugal, Andorra, even parts of France. The cause is still being investigated.
Yeah, a major event with tragic potential consequences.
Back to the U.S. briefly, focusing on celebrity news and Katy Perry.
She's spoken out about the backlash from her Blue Origin space trip.
Said she felt battered and bruised by the online criticism, but she's okay.
This was about 2 weeks after the 11-minute flight. She felt the online world made her a human piñata.
Her comments came after fans actually paid for a supportive billboard in Times Square ahead of her tour.
Nice gesture from them. She thanked her fans for being on the journey together.
The general narrative around her has been a bit more negative lately, hasn't it? Album reception, a music video.
And then the spaceflight, which many called tone deaf, given current economic struggles.
Even Lily Allen apologized for being mean about it, saying the pile-on wasn't justified.
Perry told her fans she feels they've grown up together, and she knows who I am. She's focusing on her world tour now.
Which runs until December across multiple continents.
Right. Let's shift back to Europe, specifically Sweden.
There's been an arrest after that triple shooting in Uppsala.
Yes, police arrested a teenager. The shooting happened Tuesday at a hair salon.
The shooter apparently fled on a scooter, sparking a manhunt. The person arrested is under 18.
All 3 victims were young, 15 to 20 years old. Identities aren't fully confirmed yet.
And police suspect a link to gang crime.
That's the line of investigation. One victim was reportedly known to police, linked to a probe involving a planned attack on a relative of gang leader Ismail Abdo Jordgubban.
That name rings a bell. His mother's murder in Uppsala last year really escalated the gang violence.
Exactly. Sweden's been dealing with rising teenage gang crime.
The government's proposing controversial measures like wiretapping under 15s without concrete evidence.
Acknowledging the privacy issues, but arguing it's needed to stop recruitment. They also want tighter gun laws.
This shooting happened just before the big Walpurgis festival, Valborg, in Uppsala, too.
Yeah, the police chief urged vigilance, but said people shouldn't change plans, though noting no guarantees against more violence despite a large police presence.
Witnesses heard bang, 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 thought it was fireworks initially.
A truly shocking event, especially involving such young victims.
Back to the Middle East now, concerning a Palestinian journalist.
Ali al-Samoudi, a veteran journalist, has been detained by Israeli forces in Jenin.
During a raid on his son's home, he was interrogated and then hospitalized.
Yes, reportedly due to health deterioration. The Israeli military claims he's linked to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, suspected of transferring funds.
Have they provided evidence?
Not publicly, no. His family strongly denies it, says he's never faced such accusations. They don't even know which hospital he's in.
He's due in military court next Tuesday. The military also announced 24 other detentions across the West Bank for alleged terror financing.
And crucially, al-Samoudi was with Shireen Abu Akleh when she was killed by an Israeli sniper in Jenin back in May 2022. He was wounded then.
Right, I remember. The CPJ figures are stark. 279 journalists arrested by Israel since October, 176 killed in the conflict overall.
A very dangerous situation for journalists working in the region.
Let's move over to East Asia, involving Taiwan and Somalia.
Taiwan is condemning Somalia's decision to ban travelers with Taiwanese passports from entering or transiting.
That ban took effect Wednesday, following an order from Somali aviation authorities last week. Somalia hasn't commented.
This comes as Taiwan has been strengthening ties with Somaliland.
which broke away from Somalia 34 years ago but isn't widely recognized.
Right. Taiwan and Somaliland opened embassies in each other's capitals in 2020, which angered both China and Somalia.
Taiwan's foreign ministry is protesting the ban, blaming instigation of China, and demanding it be revoked. They're advising citizens against travel there.
China, meanwhile, highly appreciates the ban, calling it a legitimate measure, reflecting Somalia's adherence to the One China principle.
It highlights that complex diplomatic dance around Taiwan's status. China claims Taiwan, but Taiwan operates as a self-governing democracy.
And Somaliland is in a similar boat, declared independence, holds elections, but lacks recognition, with Somalia still claiming it.
A lot of geopolitical maneuvering there. Okay, back to Europe, specifically Paris.
The trial has started for the suspects in the Kim Kardashian robbery from 2016.
That was a huge story. Tied up, held at gunpoint, $10 million in jewels stolen, including that massive engagement ring.
10 people are on trial. The court started with background reports. First up was Younis Abbas, 71, who admitted his role, even wrote a memoir.
He says he regrets it now after seeing the media coverage and realizing her trauma.
Gary Madar is accused of feeding info to the gang his brother's company provided transport for Kardashian. He denies it.
Mark Boyer, 78, questioned about supplying the weapon. He apparently regrets his son's criminal links. The son is also a defendant.
Another defendant, Amar 8 Kadak, is reportedly now nearly deaf and mute.
Why has the trial taken 8.5 years?
Court backlogs, partly due to terrorism trials, plus the age and health of some defendants, meaning less time in detention pre-trial.
A long road to justice. Now, back to Kenya and the aftermath of recent protests.
An investigation by our correspondent's Africa Eye has identified security personnel who allegedly shot dead 3 protesters at the parliament.
And rights groups like Amnesty and KHRC are demanding those officers face the law.
The government spokesman said investigations are ongoing via the police watchdog, IPOA, but called the documentary one-sided.
The investigation analyzed thousands of images, pinpointing a uniformed policeman and a soldier opening fire on unarmed people.
This was part of that wider crackdown on protests against a finance bill. Amnesty says at least 65 dead, 89 forcibly disappeared, thousands arrested. The government toll is 42 dead.
Rights groups are pushing for a public inquiry. Hashtag Occupy Parliament is the hashtag.
KHRC called it organized criminals in police and military uniforms deployed to murder innocent Kenyans, blaming President Ruto. There's been huge anger online.
Ruto previously defended the police and warned against commenting on the military. Police deny involvement in abductions or killings. No officers charged yet.
IPOA says it's investigating 60 deaths, 41 involving gunshots, 22 investigations are complete, 2 cases are in court. They've also recorded 233 injury cases.
The opposition claims the killings were premeditated and sanctioned at the highest levels.
Some government figures attack the documentary, saying it incites violence. Some even wanted it banned, but one senator defended it as truthful.
A very tense situation. Let's revisit the Spain blackout situation.
Right, the Spanish grid operator has now ruled out a cyber attack as the cause.
Their preliminary findings show no kind of interference in the control systems. Still no definitive cause, though.
Prime Minister Sanchez says they're working to pinpoint it to prevent it happening again.
It seems linked to 2 connection issues in the southwest and a disconnection from the French network,
which led to that sudden loss of 15 GW, about 60% of demand, on Monday.
The grid operator mentioned 2 disconnection events seconds apart in the southwest, an area with a lot of solar generation.
Only the Canaries, Balearics, Ceuta, and Melilla were unaffected.
There's been a lot of talk blaming solar power saturation or reliance on renewables. Just before the outage, the grid was running on over 60% solar.
Power restoration took nearly 23 hours. Gas plants, plus help from France and Morocco, got the grid back up. 4 nuclear reactors shut down automatically.
Sanchez insisted it was not a problem of excessive renewables and not a supply failure. Demand was normal.
Experts think it might just have been multiple failures happening at once, and the Portuguese operator denied it was a rare atmospheric event.
Still some unanswered questions there. Now, a significant EU court ruling regarding Malta.
Yes, the EU's top court ruled Malta's Golden Passport Scheme Citizenship for Investment breaks EU law.
The Commission took Malta to court in 2022 over it. Allows wealthy individuals to get an EU passport for around 600,000 euros investment.
The court said while nationality is up to member states, Malta's scheme jeopardizes the mutual trust between them. Malta could face fines if it doesn't comply.
Interestingly, this contradicts an earlier Advocate General report, which suggested no genuine link was needed.
Malta's government is not happy, says the court ignored that recommendation and points to other EU countries with similar schemes.
Malta did suspend the scheme for Russians and Belarusians after the Ukraine invasion.
The EU has long wanted these schemes gone, citing risks like money laundering, tax evasion, and security concerns.
This ruling could pressure other countries with similar programs. Back to the Middle East, Gaza specifically.
The Palestine Red Crescent Society says paramedic Assad el-Nasrallah, detained last month by Israel, has been released.
He was detained when 15 other emergency workers were killed in southern Gaza. He was missing for 3 weeks.
The ICRC eventually confirmed his detention. He was reportedly among 10 detainees freed at the border Tuesday.
The Israeli military hasn't commented on his release, but confirmed holding him during a briefing on their internal inquiry into the attack that killed the 15 workers.
That inquiry identified several professional failures. The PRCS called the inquiry an attempt to justify a war crime.
That incident involved 8 PRCS paramedics, 6 civil defense responders, and a UNRWA employee killed in Rafah on March 23rd when ambulances and other vehicles were hit.
Video showed ambulances stopped, gunfire, then soldiers approaching.
The military inquiry summary blamed an operational misunderstanding by troops who thought they faced a threat.
PRTS rejects this, saying it relies on fallacious allegations about rescue teams being Hamas to justify targeting protected medical missions.
A UN official warned the lack of accountability undermines international law. The wider conflict statistics remain grim.
Over 52,365 killed in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Recent strikes reported across Gaza City and in Al-Mawasi.
And the UN says Israel has blocked aid delivery since March 2nd, causing severe shortages.
The UN human rights chief urged action to prevent collapse of life-saving support, warned against using starvation as a weapon. Israel must ensure supplies for 2.1 million people.
Israel maintains it complies with international law, denies an aid shortage, and accuses Hamas of stealing aid, which Hamas denies.
A truly desperate humanitarian situation.
Let's move to Kashmir now, following that recent attack near Pahalgam.
Yes, a week after the attack that killed 26, the town is quiet, desolate, but a few tourists are slowly returning.
The main street, empty last week, is showing some signs of life. The attack targeted people, mostly tourists, near that beautiful Baizaran meadow.
Killing tourists is rare there. It really shocked everyone. Tourism is crucial for Pahalgam's economy.
People are worried about the long-term impact on livelihoods.
One tourist from Mumbai said they panicked but couldn't afford to change flights. Others felt reassured by locals and security.
A local driver urged visitors not to abandon Kashmir. A shawl seller reported few sales, fearing the long-term effects.
Bollywood actor Atul Kulkarni visited, saying the response to "don't come" should be coming in even larger numbers.
But the tension is palpable. Indian authorities had often claimed peace had returned after 2019.
Citing tourism numbers as proof, this attack really shattered that narrative.
A tourism operator mentioned a sense that a war is looming, leaving tourists confused. Even the inauguration of that huge new railway bridge looks uncertain now.
And business investments could dry up. Local leaders expressed anguish. The chief minister apologized in the assembly for failing to keep the victims safe, saying the attack hollowed out Kashmir.
A deeply troubling development. Now, turning to Iran and that port explosion.
The interior minister is saying negligence was a factor in the blast at Bandar Abbas, the country's largest container port. The death toll is at least 70 now.
The operating firm CEO blamed repeated and catastrophic error involving false declarations of hazardous goods.
But Iran's defense ministry denied it was improperly handled sodium perchlorate, which is used in ballistic missile fuel. They called reports fake news.
Although a risk consultancy, Ambry Intelligence, said the port did receive a sodium perchlorate shipment last month, and the blast was reportedly the result of improper handling.
The New York Times also cited a source linked to the Revolutionary Guards, saying sodium perchlorate exploded. Conflicting accounts there.
Yes, conflicting indeed. Let's move to Yemen. Reports of migrant deaths in a U.S. strike.
Houthi media claims at least 68 African migrants were killed in a U.S. airstrike on a detention center in Sada province.
Al Masirah TV reported 47 injured, many critically, showed graphic footage. a U.S. defense official acknowledged awareness of the civilian casualty claims.
This happened hours after U.S. Central Command said it hit over 800 targets since Trump ordered an intensified campaign against the Houthis on March 15th.
CENTCOM claimed hundreds of Houthi fighters and leaders killed, though Houthi authorities report mostly civilian deaths from the strikes.
The detention center reportedly held 115 Africans. Videos showed bodies being recovered. One survivor said, "The strike hit us while we were sleeping."
The chairman of the Somali community visited, called it tragic and horrific, saw burnt bodies, said most victims were Ethiopians, few Somalis. Facility was in an open area, not near military bases.
The Houthi Interior Ministry called it a deliberate bombing and war crime. U.S. CENTCOM says it takes claims seriously, is conducting an assessment and inquiry.
The IOM expressed sadness, offered support. Al Masirah also reported 8 killed in U.S. strikes in Sana'a overnight. CENTCOM limits operational details for security.
Despite the war, migrants keep coming from the Horn of Africa, trying to reach Saudi Arabia, facing terrible risks and conditions in Yemen. Nearly 61,000 arrived this year alone.
Thousands are held in detention centers with awful conditions. This isn't the first major civilian casualty claim from U.S. strikes recently.
No, the Houthis claimed 74 civilians killed at Ras Isa oil terminal earlier this month. CENTCOM said it targeted Houthi capabilities there.
Trump ordered the intensified strikes last month, warned Iran about arming the Houthis. CENTCOM says it will keep up the pressure. Houthis claim they retaliated against a U.S. carrier group.
And the backdrop is the ongoing humanitarian disaster in Yemen. Over 150,000 dead, millions displaced and needing aid.
A devastating conflict. Let's turn to the Vatican now.
Yes, they've announced the date for the conclave to elect the next pope. It starts May 7th.
Following the death of Pope Francis on Easter Monday, about 135 cardinals will meet in the Sistine Chapel.
No set time frame for the election. The last two took about 2 days each.
It starts with Mass at St. Peter's, then into the Sistine Chapel for voting, and the world watches the chimney.
Black smoke for no decision, white smoke for a new pope.
Pope Francis's funeral was on Saturday. Huge crowds, dignitaries. Cardinal Ree gave the homily on his legacy.
Huge crowds line the streets for the procession afterwards. His tomb currently has just a single white rose on it.
The focus now shifts entirely to the election of his successor. Back to Europe, a slightly less monumental event, but still notable.
The damaged Rothko painting in Rotterdam.
Yes, a child apparently damaged it at the Museum Boijmans van Boningen. Gray, orange on maroon, number 8, worth an estimated $50 million.
The museum is considering how to treat it. Happened during an unguarded moment. Damage is described as superficial, small scratches on the unvarnished paint.
They're seeking expert advice, expect it can be shown again. But modern unvarnished paintings like Rothko's are very susceptible.
Even small damage shows up easily. Restoring Rothko is notoriously difficult due to his complex materials and lack of varnish.
Not the first time either. Tate Modern had a vandalized Rothko in 2012, cost £200,000 and 18 months to fix.
Fine art insurance usually covers accidental damage by children, but we'll see. The museum hasn't commented on liability. They have billed visitors for damage before, like stepping on a peanut butter artwork.
And remember that Dutch town hall that accidentally threw out 46 artworks? Managing art is tricky.
Indeed. Now back to the U.S. and immigration issues.
Reports that 3 young U.S. citizen children, one with cancer, were deported to Honduras with their mothers last week.
Advocacy groups are raising serious due process concerns. One Louisiana-born child's family was apprehended during a routine immigration appointment.
ICE says the mother had due process, ordered deported by a judge. But there's a hearing on May 19th specifically about due process.
A second family detained April 24th. ICE allegedly refused lawyer-family contact.
This comes as the White House is highlighting immigration enforcement in Trump's first 100 days. He's expected to sign orders, including publishing a list of sanctuary cities.
Which isn't a legal term, just refers to places limiting cooperation with federal immigration authorities.
They also highlighted that raid in Colorado Springs. Thousands detained since Trump returned to office.
A contentious issue heating up again. Let's shift to Uganda now, focusing on environmental concerns.
A former biology teacher, Mustafa Jarima, or Bwana Shea, is fighting to save shea trees.
Women's gold, they call it, for the shea butter. But locals are cutting them down for charcoal, which is more profitable now than the oil.
Jarima was shocked by deforestation in the Mount Kai Central Forest Reserve. He's trying to rally villagers to protect them.
But it's tough. Failed harvests, blamed on climate change and drought, have made locals lose interest in the nuts. Charcoal from shea burns longer, increasing demand.
And poverty drives them to see trees as quick cash. Uganda's losing huge amounts of forest cover annually, including shea trees.
The shea population has plummeted across the whole shea belt from West to East Africa.
An expert, Professor Okulo, also blames past insecurity, the LRA conflict, cattle raids leading to displacement, loss of ownership, and focus on short-term gains like charcoal.
Climate change just makes it all worse. A presidential order to stop cutting shea trees has been hard to enforce.
Charcoal demand is highest in cities, highlighting the need for alternative energy sources. Jirima keeps up his awareness walks and planting drives.
A difficult battle against economic pressures and environmental change. Now, let's look at China's economy and the trade war.
Trump's tariffs, up to 145%, haven't exactly caused panic among many Chinese traders, apparently. Some mocking memes, even.
China isn't acting like a nation in deep economic pain. Xi Jinping is stressing self-reliance, being unafraid of unreasonable suppression. China is less reliant on U.S. exports than a decade ago.
But the tariffs are adding pressure to existing problems. The housing crisis, job insecurity, aging population, less spending. Xi's rejuvenated China dream is being tested.
The question is whether tariffs will hurt or maybe even create opportunities. China has a huge domestic market, but people aren't spending due to economic uncertainty, especially the housing collapse.
Xi seems to be trying to use the crisis to push change, find new markets. Exporters are looking elsewhere.
Trump's first term already pushed China to build ties in Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, via the Belt and Road Initiative. About 25% of Chinese exports now go via second countries. So U.S. actions might give Xi a chance to shape China's global role. Coercive tariff policy is an opportunity for Chinese diplomacy, some say.
But China needs to be careful not to flood new markets with cheap goods, like what happened in Southeast Asia after 2016 tariffs. And China's own past trade restrictions might hinder outreach now.
Many countries don't want to choose between Beijing and Washington. Xi seems to be betting China can withstand the pain longer.
Though Trump did hint recently at a potential tariff U-turn. Come down substantially, but it won't be zero. Something to watch.
Definitely. Now, let's look at Romania and election issues.
Romanians are voting again this weekend after the presidential election last December was canceled. Unprecedented.
That was after the far-right candidate Calin Georgescu had a shock first-round win, which was annulled amid claims of Russian interference, suspicious TikTok accounts, payments to influencers. Moscow denies interfering.
Georgescu is now banned, detained, under investigation. He denies it all. The far-right AUR party leader, George Simeon, is now the frontrunner.
The scandal centers on TikTok. Georgescu had tiny poll numbers, zero budget, no office, just viral TikToks, and won almost 23%.
A think tank said his TikTok rise was suddenly and artificially created. Authorities claim the algorithm was exploited via paid influencers, fake accounts, and a king of TikTok paying thousands.
They even claimed one campaign was identical to Russian operations in Ukraine, though public evidence of direct election interference is thin.
Influencers were paid via a platform called FameUp for vague stability and integrity videos, not naming candidates. Some didn't mark posts as paid ads, breaking TikTok rules.
Thousands of fake accounts spammed unrelated videos with pro-Georgescu comments. TikTok says it blocked millions of fake engagements and disrupted networks. Then the tax authority found the Stability and Integrity campaign was paid for by the center-right P&L party, who claimed their campaign was hijacked to support Georgescu.
And the TikTok king, Bogdan Pashir, was arrested for allegedly paying over $900,000 to 250-plus influencers via TikTok gifts to sway votes. His lawyers say the payments weren't electoral.
A musician influencer admitted getting thousands via gifts, thought it was for music, denied promoting Georgescu, but his videos got flooded with pro-Georgescu comments.
Investigations are ongoing in Romania and at the EU level. Romanians are concerned about interference, but also outraged by the lack of public proof from authorities. It's incredibly complex.
Very murky. It could take a long time to unravel. Let's shift focus back to the Middle East, specifically Iraqi Kurdistan.
Life in the village of Sirjal sounds increasingly difficult, surrounded by Turkish military bases.
At least 7 built nearby in just 2 years. One looms over the village, another under construction. One by their water supply dam, making it off limits.
A farmer there called it 100% a form of occupation. Lost access to his land. Sirjalo risks being swallowed by the forbidden zone.
That's the large strip along the Turkish border affected by the Turkey-PKK conflict since '84. up to 40 kilometers deep in places.
Hundreds of civilians reportedly killed by strikes in or near the zone, thousands displaced, villages emptied. Sergel is now effectively on the front line.
Turkish planes bomb the mountains nearby for PKK militants. Much land is burned from shelling. 89% of Turkish bases there built since 2018, when Turkey expanded its presence significantly.
Turkey says the bases are needed to fight the PKK, which it deems a terrorist group.
Kanimasi, another town near the border, once known for apples, is largely empty now. A farmer there can't access his vineyard due to a base. Drones overhead. They will shoot you if you stay.
Turkey's expansion is driven by drones, defense spending, and wider regional interventionism, like the buffer zone sought in Syria.
Iraq's government condemns it publicly, but accommodates some demands, like a 2024 deal to jointly fight the PKK without limiting Turkish troops. Iraq relies on Turkey for trade, water. Fracture politics weaken its stance.
And the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the KDP, has close ties with Turkey, which helps its economy and power.
A senior KDP figure, Hosher Zabari, blames the PKK for Turkey's presence, saying Turkey's sole goal is the PKK, not harming locals.
But the conflict continues. Turkey shells, PKK claims drone downings, violence is up, civilians at risk. One civilian cancer patient killed by an airstrike last year, police report blamed a Turkish drone.
His cousin was then detained by Kurdish forces for 8 months on suspicion of PKK support after complaining. The victim's father said they have no rights to kill people on their own land.
There are suggestions Kurdish authorities might help Turkey avoid accountability, listing only explosion on death certificates sometimes.
Though the KRG acknowledges tragic loss of civilians and documents some as civilian martyrs eligible for compensation. A deeply troubling situation for people caught in the middle.
Absolutely. Let's head to Vietnam now. A story of economic transformation and ambition.
Vietnam has changed dramatically since the U.S. withdrawal. Become enterprising, fast-growing, richer. The communist leadership embraced capitalism, aiming to be a manufacturing hub like China.
A risky goal, though, especially with Trump's trade war and threats of high tariffs.
Vietnam's history is complex: French colony, Chinese vassal, proxy battlefield. Now it's on the front line again, this time in the U.S. effort to counter China's economic rise simply due to geography.
It's a young country, median age 33. Young people like Lin, the student, want jobs, success for Vietnam and themselves.
Ho Chi Minh City is modern, sprawling, few signs of socialist ideology. Young people aren't focused on the war anniversary.
There's enthusiasm for the future. Min, the law student, wants to be successful and rich, says youth aren't angry at Americans, want trade, want to learn. Globalization.
The new party chief wants to cut bureaucracy. The electronics industry is shifting out of China. Vietnam looks attractive.
That shift started around 2018 with Trump's first trade war. Chinese businesses are even setting up factories in Vietnam to export to the U.S., seeing it as a lot better here than China right now.
But some factories paused plans due to policy changes. Everyone is waiting. Vietnam needs both America and China.
It recently welcomed Xi Jinping warmly, but relations with China are always complex. China's ambitions can be seen as a threat. Vietnam walks a tightrope.
A very delicate balancing act. Now let's go back to Australia and the federal election campaign.
You mentioned the lack of political posters in that Indigenous community near Cairns. An expert noted politicians seem to be avoiding First Nations issues.
Seen as divisive, electorally risky after the voice referendum failed last year. 60% rejected recognizing Indigenous people in the Constitution and giving them a political say.
Warren Mundine, who campaigned against the voice, said politicians disengaged afterwards. No conversation about an Aboriginal policy this election.
Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe agrees, says Albanese is too scared to mention us, notes the complete silence compared to past elections.
And the closing the gap targets for Indigenous well-being, mostly not being met, some worsening, like incarceration rates up 12% in a year.
Professor Rodney Smith thinks the voice defeat makes focusing on these issues electorally foolish. Points to coalition ads linking referendum cost to cost of living. He thinks it's a return to the norm after a period of focus.
ANU data shows fewer people think the government is responsible for reducing the gap. A Liberal candidate in NT admitted he avoids the topic, campaigning wouldn't be game.
This is tough for many Indigenous people, especially after the referendum's toll. A report found increased racism around the vote.
Advocate Nakia Louie says respectful debates need leaders willing to have nuanced and informed conversations, which he doesn't see happening in current Australian politics.
A concerning silence on crucial issues. Okay, let's quickly fact-check some claims from President Trump's 100 Days speech.
He claimed most successful first 100 days, highlighted immigration, jobs, ending inflation. What about specifics? Petrol prices.
He said down by a lot, even $1.98 in a lot of states. Fact. Average U.S. gas price actually slightly up since January. No state average below $2.67 as of late April.
Egg prices down 87%.
Fact. Average consumer price rose. Wholesale prices dropped about 52%, not 87% for consumers.
Border crossings, claimed lowest ever recorded for Feb-March.
Fact. Those months did see the lowest monthly encounter since 2000, likely lowest since the late 1960s based on older data, so that claim holds up better.
And the Doge savings. Department of Government Efficiency saving 150 bat-pounds.
Fact. The associated website claimed 160 bat-pounds, but less than 40% is itemized with proof, and experts questioned some claim savings, so that's less solid.
Good to have those clarifications. Let's briefly touch on personal experiences during that Spain-Portugal blackout again.
Yes, power out for almost 23 hours for many. People using old wind-up radios for info. Supermarkets saw runs on non-perishable food.
Lots of candles and torches, raising fire concerns. Power banks became essential.
Some people actually found the tech disconnection a relief, interestingly.
It definitely made people think about dependence on tech and basic preparedness. Battery radios, tinned food, candles.
A reminder of vulnerabilities. Now let's look at the Canadian election outcome.
Mark Carney and the Liberals claimed a remarkable victory, seemingly helped by Trump's criticisms of Canada.
It's an interesting theory. Trump's constant negative comments coincided with a liberal poll turnaround. Carney leaned into the U.S. threat in his victory speech.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. Strong words.
Before Trump's resurgence, the conservatives under Poilievre were leading due to economic woes and liberal fatigue.
Liberals probably won't thank Trump, who will likely keep up the rhetoric. The irony is Trump might have stopped a Poilievre government, which is closer ideologically to him.
Canada seems to be looking more towards Europe now. Carney pledged quick trade talks with the U.S. to avoid auto tariffs kicking in May 3rd.
The Canadian economy relies heavily on the U.S. A trade war means high recession risk. Carney promised to prevent that.
Trump kept commenting during voting, calling the border artificially drawn, suggesting Canada join the U.S. Carney faces a generational challenge dealing with Trump's second term.
A complex relationship getting more complex. Let's delve into some history now, African popes.
Fascinating stuff. North Africa, now mostly Muslim, was a Christian heartland of the Roman Empire, producing influential popes.
Pope Victor I, likely Berber, 2nd century, known for making Easter celebrated on Sunday, called the First Roman Synod, pushed for uniformity.
Pope Miltiades, 4th century. His reign saw Christianity become more accepted, though not his doing. Constantine gave him a palace, the first papal residence, allowed Lateran basilica construction.
Pope Gelasius I, late 5th century, maybe Roman-born of North African descent. Hugely important. First called Vicar of Christ, developed the doctrine of the two swords, church-state power, asserted papal supremacy, established St. Valentine's Day.
We don't know what they look like exactly. The Roman Empire focused on ethnicity, not modern concepts of race. North Africa was multicultural. Most considered themselves Roman.
No African pope since Gelasius I. Or weakening North African church after Rome fell, Muslim incursions, and the papacy becoming an Italian monopoly for centuries.
But now, strong chance of a future pope from Asia or Africa. Huge Catholic growth there. Africa has 281 million Catholics, 20% of the global total. 3 African cardinals seen as potential successors.
Power within the church is still concentrated north, but as African Catholicism grows, an African pope seems increasingly possible.
A historical shift potentially underway. Now back to the present day and Russia's ceasefire proposals in Ukraine.
Are these short ceasefires genuine peace efforts or just PR? We had a 30-hour Easter one, now a 3-day one for early May, coinciding with the WW2 anniversary.
Kremlin cites humanitarian reasons, expects Ukraine to reciprocate. Ukraine questions the delay, wants an immediate 30-day ceasefire, at least.
Ukraine accused Russia of violating the Easter ceasefire repeatedly. Moscow likely uses these announcements to look like the peacemaker, paint Kyiv as the aggressor, signal the White House.
But recent Trump comments suggest he's not convinced. Criticized Russian strikes on civilians, questioned Putin's sincerity, hinted at tougher measures like banking or secondary sanctions.
Another Russian ceasefire was announced right after Trump's remarks. Maybe he's losing patience.
Could be. His administration previously pushed for a 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine agreed to, but Russia didn't. Russian officials are already using this 3-day offer to criticize Ukraine if they don't comply.
Seems more strategic messaging than a genuine peace move for now. Finally, let's head back to Canada's north one last time.
Campaigning in Nunavut, Canada's largest federal district, 3 times the size of France, 1 MP for 40,000 people.
Vast, remote Arctic territory. Only travel between the 25 communities is by air. Campaign manager Kathy Kettler flew 1,700 kilometers in 24 hours once.
Challenges are totally different from southern Canada. Minus 24-degree door knocking, adapting to cultural norms like not knocking before entering homes.
Mostly Inuit population speaking in Inuktitut. Translation and interpreters are a major campaign cost.
Election issues are different too. Food security, survival, often priority over national talk of Arctic sovereignty. Food is incredibly expensive. Clean water infrastructure challenges.
Kettler boiled water while campaigning. Can't rely on costly phone calls. Incumbent Lori Eilout, NDP, is running again against conservative James Eric.
The returning officer described the difficulty getting ballots and lists to all communities, even remote lines.
Despite it all, Kettler found campaigning there meaningful, shows democratic engagement in challenging places.
Absolutely. And that wraps up our global news roundup for today.
We've covered a lot, from geopolitical agreements and economic shifts to internal dissent and local challenges across continents. It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Definitely. Events in one corner can ripple outwards in unexpected ways. Keeping track helps you understand the forces shaping our world.
As you process today's updates, think about those connections. How might a trade policy influence a resource conflict far away, or a local incident reflect broader global trends?
And considering the growing focus on critical resources, like those minerals in Ukraine, and the ongoing tensions we see globally, a question to ponder is, how will this competition for vital materials shape international relations moving forward? Will it lead to more conflict, or perhaps new forms of cooperation?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.